Welcome, my name is Anne Toomey, and in this video I will explain what a constitution is, what goes in it, why it's important, and why you should care about it. So let's start with what a constitution is. It's a law, but a very special law. It's the law from which all other laws are derived. It's the ultimate law from which all legal and government power flows. Accepting that it's the most important law in the country, what does it actually do? Well, first, a constitution establishes the institutions of government. Normally, you have a legislative body, known as a parliament. You have executive officers, such as ministers and their departments, and you have courts. Now, it will often set out what the qualifications are for being part of these bodies. You might remember from a while ago, those politicians who botched that bit, that was section 44 of the Constitution, which led to them being disqualified. The Constitution will ordinarily also set out the means of choosing the membership of the branches of government, such as election of members of Parliament and the appointment of judges. Second, the Constitution grants these institutions powers and limits those powers. In doing so, it protects the people by providing for the separation of powers so that all power is not held in the one set of hands, and that's very important. A constitution will therefore usually separate power by giving legislative power to the Parliament, executive power to the government, and judicial power to the courts. It can also distribute power amongst different levels of government in a federation, which is another way of preventing power from accumulating in one set of hands. Third, a constitution often sets out how these different powers interact and operate as a check and balance on the other. For example, members of the judicial branch, judges, are appointed by the executive government, but they're then given tenure until the age of 70 at the Commonwealth level, which means that they can't be removed from being a judge except by the Governor-General, a member of the executive, as advised by ministers, also members of the executive, after both houses of Parliament have asked that the judge be removed on the ground of proved misbehaviour or incapacity. Now note the different roles there played by each of the three branches of government and the important underlying principle of judicial independence. The idea here is that the government cannot sack a judge for making decisions that the government doesn't like. This ensures that the judiciary is able to behave fairly without feeling that it's under threat. Now fourth, a constitution will usually deal with finances. Money, of course, being extremely important because a government can't run without money. So there will normally be provisions in there about raising money, such as through taxation or borrowing money. It'll also look at where the money is kept. So for example, at the Commonwealth level, it has to be kept in a consolidated revenue fund. How the money is taken out of that fund is also important. So at the Commonwealth level again, an appropriation of that money by a law passed by Parliament. And finally, who can authorise the spending of that money? For example, ministers can authorise it, but only if it's authorised for a purpose approved by Parliament. A constitution can also deal with how money is transferred between the levels of government in a federal system. Fifth, a constitution will often grant individual rights or freedoms, either giving positive rights by saying you have the right or the freedom to do something, or by restricting the power of parliaments or governments to limit your individual rights or freedoms, so negative rights, and they tend to be the ones that we have. A constitution may also impose responsibilities. Now, the Commonwealth Constitution is actually pretty light on when it comes to rights. They actually chose not to include a Bill of Rights, but there are some limited rights in there if you look hard enough. Finally, a constitution also sets out some way of altering the constitution in the future. Now, a constitution may be flexible, meaning that it can be changed by ordinary legislation. The United Kingdom and New Zealand fall into that category. Their parliaments have full power to be able to change their laws, including laws that are fundamental constitutional ones. But where a constitution distributes power among different levels of government in a federation, then it would be inappropriate to give the parliament of one level of the federation power to change the constitution, because it would probably then wipe out or severely limit the powers of the other levels of government. And that's why most federal countries have what are called entrenched constitutions. And that means that their provisions can only be changed in a particular way, which is often quite difficult and outside the power of one level of government alone. In Australia, the Commonwealth Constitution can only be changed by a law passed not only by the Commonwealth Parliament, but also by the people in a referendum. And on that, see my other video about how referendums work. In summary, if a law is made by Parliament or even developed as part of the common law by a court, the ultimate source of power to make that law is the Constitution. The Constitution is also the source of all executive power exercised by ministers, including things like the power to declare war, enter into treaties, or spend money on government programs. Why then is the Constitution important and interesting? Well, that is because, as you might have guessed by now, it's all about power. Who has it? How can it be exercised? And what are the limits on it? So it's not actually boring at all, but you do still need a good guide for it to make any sense to you. Now, when I was in school in Year 9, I decided, and clearly I was a bit of a nerd, as you can tell from this, but I decided that I was going to be a responsible citizen and that therefore I should sit down and read the Constitution. Now, I grew up in ancient times that were pre-internet, when it was actually much harder to find a copy of the Constitution than it is today. In fact, I grew up in a country town in a rather poor area, but our school library did remarkably still have a copy of the Constitution. So one lunchtime, when it was searingly hot outside, I took refuge in the library and sat down to read the Constitution cover to cover. Now, was I inspired then to make the Constitution my life's work and become a constitutional lawyer? In a word, no. Actually, I was really disappointed. It was so boring. It was just a very spare and dry set of rules. I was expecting soaring rhetoric and great principle and things you'd want to go out there and die for, and all I could see was a lot of very detailed rules about who got to do what. And even then, I also knew enough to be able to recognise that these rules didn't even actually match what happened in the real world. The Constitution said, for example, that the Queen was part of Parliament. How could she be part of Parliament? She doesn't sit there. She only came out a few times to open it. And it said that she could disallow laws made by the Commonwealth Parliament. But I knew that didn't actually happen in real life. In fact, the Constitution didn't even mention the Cabinet and the Prime Minister. So my very first encounter with the Constitution was frankly a bit disillusioning. What I didn't realise was that all those important democratic principles that I was so yearning to see are part of the Constitution, but they sit underneath the words and they shape how the words operate. And there are even some implied rights in there too, such as a freedom of political communication, but you can't see them on the words of the page. Powers that seem absolute in the Constitution, like the power of the Governor-General to appoint ministers, are also constrained by conventions, and again, you cannot see them on the face of the page. The Constitution is actually far richer than the words on the page of the document suggest. But you need someone to guide you so that you can understand how it works, from the nuts and bolts of how it operates through to the grand principles and the guiding conventions. And that, friends, is what I'm here for. I'm here to be your constitutional clarion. Okay, now you get the name of the website or the YouTube site. I'm here to explain to you all that context of history, principle and convention so that it actually all makes sense. Now, constitutional lawyers tend to make jokes about the power in the Constitution for Parliament to make laws about lighthouses, lightships, beacons and buoys. And this is because it actually seems like a pretty useless power in comparison to the rather more important ones that are conferred on the national parliament. But my aim here, as someone who has spent her life learning about the Constitution, is to be that beacon for you, shedding light on the Constitution and explaining it in a way that can be easily understood. So that's why I chose to use as a symbol for this YouTube channel a little lighthouse or a beacon that's actually quite near where I live. I actually go past it all the time on a ferry. And at night, you realise how important it is. My slogan for the banner of this channel originally included a Section 51.7 beacon of light in a sea of constitutional confusion, which I think is actually quite good. But then I discovered it was actually too hard to fit the words on with the picture and I had to drop them. So maybe I'll try it again when my technological skills improve. But in any event, let me be your beacon, your constitutional clarion, explaining those constitutional mysteries to you. Because it is really important that people understand the Constitution and how their system of government works. Why, you may well ask? Well, so you can be a responsible citizen and fulfil your constitutional responsibilities, such as voting in elections and referendums. So you can feel empowered to navigate the complex system of government and to achieve fair outcomes for yourself and those that you care about. So you aren't taken in and manipulated by all those conspiracy theorists and charlatans out there on the internet who want to mislead you or undermine elections. So you can recognise when things are going wrong and you can campaign for change. So you can do your part in maintaining our democratic system of government and contribute to the well-being of the country. Now, I'm guessing you've probably had that feeling lurking inside you for a long time that you really should know more about these things, just as I had that feeling when I was in year 9. But I get it, you're busy and you really have no idea where to start. Well, here's your answer. You start here. And that's presumably why you turned the video on to begin with. At least I'm hoping someone has. So well done. You are on the way. Stick in there. And until next time, adieu.